All right, greetings, Cornerstone family, to one more Wednesday night study. You might be watching this anytime during the week, but this is what we've been doing for the last couple of months, at least, maybe a little longer, to take the place of our Wednesday night Bible study until eventually soon, I hope, we'll be meeting in person again. And so it'll look a little different then, but we're trying to do an online study that we're recording and putting out on our YouTube channel, and that's, I guess, where you're finding me today. But welcome to our study, and we are working on a series on our Wednesday night called Who is My Neighbor? And the idea is that it's very clear Jesus said the most important things to consider in our Christian walk are love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So then the question arose, who is my neighbor? And so we've been analyzing that. The story of the Good Samaritan has come up, others, how Jesus treated those who he had an encounter with. And really that's the key part of that is Jesus treated people who he had an encounter with well. And so the neighbor kind of aspect of it is whoever are people in your life that you walk around and you find. Today's scripture is a perfect example of that. What we're going to do, we're picking up in the book of Matthew, and it's in the middle of some of the other things we've talked about, so there's some familiar in here already. But it's right after the Sermon on the Mount. Literally, it says when Jesus came down from the mountain. So chapter 5, 6, and 7, Jesus is breaking the mold in some way. He says a lot, you've heard it said, but I say. And so he tells them to love their neighbor. He tells them to love their enemy. I mean, don't judge. He tells them all this other stuff. And really, so I think people are kind of reeling from that. Blessed are the poor, So he's kind of, he's kind of telling them some things that are different. He says, "You've heard it said, don't murder." I say, don't even be angry. That's what Jesus said. So he's trying to connect, I think. The way that the law talked about our outward actions, and he's really saying that starts with the heart. And then chapter 8 is about, I guess, his first opportunity after the Sermon on the Mount. He's coming down off the mountain to practice what he's preached, to showcase his perspective on life, which is different than theirs. So it ends with them saying, hey, everybody who heard that sermon that he just preached was astonished. They're getting ready to be even more astonished because his actions in this way are really even more scandalous than some of the things that he said. So let's walk through one chapter and we'll just show you. It really is a chapter about faith, calling his disciples, doing some other things. But for us, we're going to look at it on how Jesus treated people along the way. And so we're kind of looking at it from a top down, not necessarily from inside what's it teaching us, but looking back over it. How does Jesus respond to those that he has an encounter with? And the first one is scandalous. Because it says in verse 1, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. This is a statement of faith, a simple statement of faith. I believe, God, that you have the power to heal me from this leprosy. The leprosy would have been something that kept him out of the temple, kept him away from crowds. People were afraid of him, would have shunned him. It was leprosy was not something very nice. But he's asking for something more than just being healed. He's asking, I think, Jesus for communal restoration, to be a part of the community again, not to be an outcast. I think is exactly what this man wants. He's not saying, hey, this illness is inconvenient. He's saying, I want to be in again. And Jesus, in the way he responded, shows that he understands that. So Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. Okay, so there's two big scandalous things, and the first one is, I will be clean, which is Jesus saying, I will heal you. And he knew what the guy wanted was not just be healed, but to be clean, to be ceremonially clean, to be able to go back into the temple, to not be somebody who was outcast. And so it doesn't say that the leprosy was immediately healed. It said it was cleansed. So there's a deeper kind of concept here that Jesus touched an unclean person. thereby really making himself unclean. And so Jesus gives him specific advice, saying, see to it that don't tell anybody, but he tells a lot of people, and there are people watching him. So that's interesting. He said, go show yourself to the priest so that you're clean. Offer the gift that Moses commanded. In other words, there's a sacrifice, there's an offering that under the Mosaic law that you have to be clean again. And so that'll be a proof to them. Technically, Jesus then has to do the same thing because he just touched this man. He's ceremonially unclean. The Son of the living God can't go into the temple that was built for him. And so Jesus showed that he was willing to travel culturally to a place of not being popular, to a place of being outcast himself, to redeem those who weren't. Now you say, okay, Jesus touched him, he healed him, and now he's clean. And to me, the people watching, that wouldn't have mattered. By touching him, Jesus is still unclean. Why couldn't Jesus have just said, be healed, which he did in other cases? Why couldn't he spin around and say, touch my garment like that lady did? Jesus could have done all kinds of things, but he didn't intentionally. It says he touched the man. And so the question for us is, which of our neighbors are we kind of afraid to be around, to be too close to, that we might catch what they have? If there's a situation like that, Jesus then breached that. He took on that. He created a bridge to that. We see a second one, and we've talked about this already, the faith of the centurion. Who was a centurion? They were a Roman officer. The Romans were the occupiers. They were the enemies. And so Jesus is helping them out. But in the process of that, he's elevating this person like he did with the Good Samaritan. The good centurion would have been just as much kind of an oxymoron to call somebody good that they didn't consider to be good. So we read this story, and it says, when he entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. This might have been somebody who was in his household to be a servant. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. Again, Jesus just touched somebody, and this centurion saying, just say the word. And then that's what he said. I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. So I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. So when Jesus heard that, he marveled and said to those who followed, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. So he's elevating the centurion in terms of faith, which is a big part of this chapter and these portions, to convince people to have faith that Jesus can do what he says he can do. In the meantime, he's proving that lesson by going around and loving his neighbor, the people that he has an encounter with. And so he has a quick teaching there about the people that are going to come in from the outside, so that what Jesus is saying is the Christian faith is no longer going to be about the nation of Israel. It's going to be a broader thing with people from outsiders. Of course, that's what happens. And then he says to the centurion, go and let it be done as you believed, and the servant was healed at that very moment. So there's obviously corroborating evidence somewhere along the way that Jesus said at 4 o'clock, be healed, and they came back and said, when was the servant healed? And it was a strange thing. It was just healed at 4 o'clock. And so we have that as part of Matthew's story to teach us about Jesus. So he goes around, he's healing more people. This is an opportunity for me to make a joke, but I won't, because you can say, well, one thing to heal a leper and one thing to heal a centurion, but it's another to heal somebody's mother-in-law, because mother-in-laws get a bad rap, but I have a great mother-in-law, so I don't have a problem with that. And so I'm not going to tell any jokes about mother-in-laws, because that would be highly inappropriate, and I would not do that. But Jesus is in Peter's house, and so he sees his mother-in-law sick with a fever, and so he touches her hand, again, touching somebody who's sick. And there's power in that, by the way. And so that's one of the sad things about now, people who are in hospitals, nursing homes, and sick, who don't have people around them just to reach down and grab their hand and comfort them. It's a sad time we live in with this epidemic in 2020. Pandemic, I guess I should say. So, he touched her hand, the fever left, she rose and began to serve them. And that evening they brought in so many more people who were oppressed by demons, cast out spirits with a word. He cast out spirits with a word, but he touched the leper. Don't let that become a minor point. It's a major point of this. with a word, healed those who were sick, and all who were sick. And so Jesus had compassion on them. The heart, which we talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, his heart was in the right place, and so he did that. So at some point, and again, there's a verse about fulfilling the word that was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illness and bore our diseases. But then he talks about a large crowd gathering around them, and he gave orders to go over to the other side. They were at the lake there, and a scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go." And he warns them. This is what he said: "Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." In other words, the things that he's doing is going to get him run out of town. It happens, but that's what he's saying. If you think following me is going to be comfortable, you're wrong. Because when you start breaking social barriers, the ones that I came to break, he says, "I didn't come to save those who aren't sick. I came for the sinners who are sick." So he came to lift up the people that the rest of society was pushing down. It's a big thing. So another one of his disciples said, "Lord, let me go first and bury my father." And he said, if you got other things to do, go do that. But if you want to follow me, follow me. But he says, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own." You have to be careful how you read that, because at some point he tells us take responsibility for our households, do the things that's right. So you have to really be careful, all of these statements, in reading into the context of it to see how you see it. But then, so Jesus gets in a boat, he's headed to the other side. It's a great storm arose, and so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but Jesus was down in the bottom asleep. And to me, this is a great story. They went and woke him up saying, "Save us, God, we're perishing." To say we're perishing when Jesus is in the boat is kind of an exaggeration, because they weren't going to perish, because the Son of Man was not going to perish that day. And so, but they're fearful. They're fearful. And so I think this little inset, with all the other stories around it being about faith and about Jesus loving his neighbor, treating people well, but in a way that culture didn't expect. And then saying, "I'm not going to have anywhere to lay my head." And then saying, "Hey, don't be afraid." Because if you follow Jesus, it's going to take you out of your comfort zone. And one of our natural responses is going to be afraid. And he says, don't. Why are you afraid, O little faith? Fear is the opposite of faith. If he's teaching about faith, then why don't we say a word about fear? Fear does not build bridges. Fear tears down. Fear destroys. Fear stands in the way. So he says, get rid of fear. So he arose and rebuked the wind. He doesn't rebuke the leper. He doesn't rebuke the centurion. He rebukes the weather. And so suddenly the winds and the sea, there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Well, that's what we got to figure out. That's the whole book of Matthew. That's all the Gospels. What kind of man is this? That's a great question. And the Gospel of Mark, the next story, is going to give us the answer. But the disciples aren't going to say it. The scribes and the Pharisees, the leaders of the law, they're not going to say, who is it? The answer to the question, what kind of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him, is going to be answered by a demon. I love the Bible. Just keep reading. It's going to get great. A lot of verses in this chapter, but we're almost done. And it says, so then he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, or the Gerasenes, depending on how you read that. Different manuscripts refer to that region in different ways. 2 demon-possessed men met with him, coming out of the tomb so fierce that no one could pass that way. Imagine a bridge goes out in your neighborhood, and instead of being able to travel 1 or 2 miles into town, you got to go a different way, and it becomes 8 or 9 miles. And so it's a huge inconvenience. So it says that's kind of what's going on here, but it's these 2 demon-possessed men who are in the tombs, they're in the caves, they're in the catacombs, or however you want to describe that. And people would come by, and these guys would jump out. That's the way I picture it. I don't know if they did little, but maybe. And so nobody wanted to go through there. And so it's a hassle and inconvenience. Here comes along Jesus. And they cried out to him, these demons inside the men, what have you to do with us, O Son of God? There's the answer to the question. The demons know who he is. He's the Son of God. The disciples weren't quite clear. They thought they were going to die that day, and the Son of God with them. No, that's not going to happen. And so the demons give us the answer. What kind of man is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? The demons are like, Son of God, Son of God. He's got power to cast us out. There's going to be a day when he really does torture us. But we're going to ask him if torment. If this is the day or if it's later, and we had this encounter, but they said, "Oh, Son of God, what have you to do with us? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" They know there's going to be a day of reckoning. They know it. Maybe not everybody else knows it, but the demons are clued in. They know what they got on their hands. So a herd of many pigs was feeding at the same time. Again, the unclean, the dirty, rotten pigs that they're not allowed to eat. And so the demons begged him, saying, "If you cast us out," well, they knew they're getting ready to get cast out because here's the Son of God. That's what he does. He casts out demons. He pursues good, not evil. And they're about evil, and they're about fear, and they're about doing all this stuff. And so he says to them, "Go." So they came out, and they went in the pigs, and behold, they got so worked up in the pigs that the whole herd rushed down a steep bank into the sea and drowned in the water, all these dead pigs. So the herdsmen who are watching the pigs, I guess shepherds are one thing, but herdsmen of pigs are even less clean. But they go into the city, and they tell everybody, especially what had happened to the demon-possessed men, which is what? It doesn't really say as much as the demons left and went into the pigs, and it records the story of the pigs. It doesn't talk about the men, but the men there are not demon-possessed anymore. They go about their lives. They're free. They're not no longer slaves. No longer slaves. And so they report what happens there. And then this is the response to Jesus. Okay, so he touched a leper. He healed somebody in the household of a centurion. He healed a mother-in-law. He healed all these other people. He cast out demons. He calmed storms. And he predicted that he's going to get run out of town. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And here's how they respond. Verse 34, the last verse, this is it. What happens to Jesus? And incidentally, if we become followers, disciples as well, what might happen to us? Behold, all the city came out to meet him. When they saw him, read that part. They begged him to leave their region. Thanks for clearing up the traffic jam so that our area can go back. Thanks for clearing out these two yahoos running around in the tombs who are scaring everybody away. And as a big thank you, Jesus, for doing that, please leave. Why? They're afraid of him. They're afraid of him. And he's doing only good. He's healing people. But he's breaking the norms of society. So I think Jesus, when he says, love your neighbor, he's saying wherever they are, if you have to stoop to love them, stoop away. If you have to find them where they are, go find them where they are and love them anyway. That, my friends, is going to come at a cost. Okay, it's going to come at a big cost. The very next thing he does is heal the paralytic. We talked about that story where Jesus said, your sins are forgiven. He did that to make people mad, to show them that it wasn't the sins of the paralytic or the sins of his parents that got him in this trouble, but he was going to forgive their sins, just show that he could. And then he calls Matthew. In chapter 9, he calls Matthew. And what is he saying? Follow me, and I'll teach you how to do what I'm doing, which is how to get kicked out, how to have people not like you, how to be misunderstood by your own disciples, but understood very well by demons. The demons knew who Jesus was, and the disciples took a while to figure it out. And so he begins calling his other people, but he does that. He calls the disciples as he's loving his neighbor, as he's loving those he has encounter with. Jesus said, oh, a leper, let me touch you. Hey, come here, follow me, and I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to show you how to touch lepers. That's our job, Christians. You're a disciple of Jesus, you're a follower. Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. What does that mean? You go down to where the fish are and you bring them up into the fold for Jesus, right? And so wherever they happen to be, there's more in here about Jesus coming to seek and save the lost and do all of those things. For one of the verses in chapter 9, I came not to call the righteous but sinners to repentance. Those who have welled have no need of a physician. So he says, just go and figure that out. So if we think our Christianity is about going out healthy, hanging out with healthy people, not so much. As you go along and you find somebody who's hungry, feed them. You find somebody who's thirsty, give them something to drink. You find somebody who's naked, clothe them. You find somebody in prison. How do you find somebody in prison? You go to the prison to visit people. You find them in prison, visit them. You find somebody beaten on the side of the road, pick them up, nurse their wounds, take them somewhere, take care of them. You find somebody who's poor, give them some alms so that they can eat. It's not complicated. This is how Jesus treated the people around him. And then I think the commandment therefore is go and do likewise. Because that's what he asked. Who was the great neighbor? Well, it's the one who loved. It's Jesus, the one who cared for. The Good Samaritan, the one who took care of this guy. And Jesus said, then go and do like that. Instead of saying, who's our neighbor? And we figure out who we have to love and who we don't. He just says, go around, live your life. When you encounter somebody with a need, meet it in my name. Meet it in my name. All right, so there's another week. We're going to spend some time, maybe next week, in the book of Romans. It's not necessarily a story of what Jesus does, but it's a great passage from Paul about what are the marks of a true Christian. And I look forward to doing that. But it really is, in many ways, two things. Again, repeating what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount about loving our enemies and doing those good to those who persecute us, which are the people around us who we've upset in some way, shape, or form. But it's also about if you find a need, meet it. And so we're going to do that next week, and I look forward to that. I think this has been a great study. My prayer is that God will bless you and open up opportunities for you to show the love of Jesus Christ to those around you in your life. God bless you.